Today, LEGO is the world's largest toy company, operating in over 130 countries with more than 30,000 employees and $10.8 billion in revenue in 2024. But it wasn't always this way. LEGO's path to success has been full of ups and downs. LEGO's history spans over 90 years, so this series will focus on the most pivotal events from each decade that ultimately resulted in the brand we know of today. Let's get into it. To truly understand LEGO as a company, you first need to understand the company's founder, Ole Kirk Christiansen, and how his experiences, morals, and ambitions set the foundation for an expansive toy empire. Ole Kirk was born on April 7, 1891, in a small town about 12 miles or 20 kilometers away from the company's current headquarters in Billund, Denmark. The son of a poor farmer and one of 13 children, Ole Kirk wasn't exactly set up for success. But by the time he was 6 years old, he had already developed a passion for woodworking. At the age of 14, he began working as an apprentice for his older brother before joining the Danish military in 1911. In 1916, Ole Kirk returned to Billund, got married, and bought a small carpentry shop using the money he'd earned from the army. This shop, which he called the Billund Woodworking and Carpentry Shop, was focused on restoring and developing new buildings, as well as producing household furniture for the local community. In his small community, Ole Kirk's business was a near-instant success, and he quickly earned a reputation for his unending work ethic and unflinching dedication to quality. Sadly, the entire company was nearly destroyed in 1924 when two of Ole Kirk's sons, Gottfried and Karl, were tinkering in the shop. It seems that a small fire got out of control and completely burned down not only the workshop, but also the family home. Fortunately, the family was able to rebuild an even larger workshop and home by the end of the year, and by 1930, the family business was up and running, with Ole Kirk employing a small team of workers to serve his ever-growing list of clients. Gottfried would later go on to say that burning down the workshop was actually his first, quote, achievement, as it was the catalyst needed to expand the family business, and the rebuilt home still stands today, and was even immortalized by an official LEGO employee-exclusive set released in 2012. Things were looking bright for the company, but global affairs would soon throw yet another wrench into the gears when the Great Depression, which had started in the US in 1929, made its way to Denmark by 1932. Suddenly, the demand for expensive new custom furniture dried up, and Ole Kirk was put in a very difficult situation, where the work he'd been known for was simply no longer required by customers. With demand drying up and facing hard times, Ole Kirk had a choice to make: ride out the storm or change the way he did business. Since he was never afraid to take risks, Ole Kirk decided the best thing he could do to keep afloat was to pivot his company away from large, expensive items to smaller, cheaper toys, which were still affordable even during the crisis. Later in life, Ole Kirk would go on to say that, quote, "Not until the day when I said to myself, you must make a choice between carpentry and toys, did I find the real answer." That year, he founded his then unnamed company and got to work selling toys. While this decision would ultimately prove to be the right one, success didn't come overnight, and times were hard for the struggling woodworker. By the end of the year, the business was still not turning a profit and was very nearly forced to close down until Ole Kirk was able to secure a loan of roughly $21,000 in today's money to keep the doors open for just a little bit longer. After a few hard years, things were beginning to turn around, and Ole Kirk's new toys were flying off the shelves. By far the most popular was the now legendary wooden duck toy, which, much like Ole Kirk's house, was also preserved forever as an official LEGO release. In fact, it was this very duck that would go on to provide Ole Kirk with the motto for his new company and set the stage for LEGO's dedication to quality. During these hard times, Ole Kirk sadly had to lay off all of his employees over the course of several years, leaving only him and his two sons, the same two who had previously burned down the old shop. One day, his son Gottfried returned from dropping off a shipment of wooden ducks and seemed to be exceptionally proud of himself. When asked why he was in such a good mood, the young man proudly told his father that he had done something exceptionally clever, which would save the struggling company a lot of money. "How did you manage that?" the boy's father asked, and Gottfried replied, "I gave the ducks just 2 coats of varnish, not 3, as we usually do." This apparently was not what Ole Kirk wanted to hear, and he snapped back at his son. You'll immediately fetch those ducks back, give them the last coat of varnish, pack them up, and return them to the station. And you'll do it all on your own, even if it takes you all night. Gottfried would later say that this moment taught him a serious lesson about the importance of quality. He carved this wooden sign which translates to the LEGO company motto, "Only the best is good enough." This sign was hung on the wall of the shop, and copies of it still grace the walls of the LEGO house in Billund to this day. By 1935, the economy in Denmark was starting to recover, and Ole Kirk had been successful enough to rehire several employees. Now, fully committed to making toys, he decided that it was time to officially brand his still unnamed company, and held a contest among his workers to come up with the best name, with the winner earning a bottle of Ole Kirk's own homemade wine. Funny enough, in the end, Ole Kirk won his own competition and chose his own submission, naming the company LEGO. This was a contraction of the Danish words leg godt, meaning play well, and starting in 1936, the company began officially using their new name. Things went well for the next few years, and the company grew rapidly. However, global affairs would once again conspire against the toymaker. In 1940, Nazi Germany seized control of Denmark, placing the country under their control. While much of the day-to-day life continued as normal and the company wasn't directly impacted, things like material shortages and overall economic slowdowns certainly had an impact on the relatively young company. However, the biggest setback was still to come and had nothing to do with World War II. They say that lightning never strikes twice, but sadly the same can't be said for fires, and in 1942 Ole Kirk's second workshop was, once again, lost in a massive blaze, when a short circuit sparked an electrical fire. If the first fire 18 years earlier had been a tragedy, this one was a complete catastrophe. In the end, Ole Kirk and LEGO lost the whole factory, and the company's entire stock of goods and materials, and even all of the blueprints for their products, were gone. At this point, nobody could have blamed Ole Kirk for packing up and walking away, but then we wouldn't be here talking about it, would we? Out of a sense of obligation to his workers and a never-say-die attitude, Ole Kirk decided to start over yet again and built a third factory. This new workshop was larger and more modern, featuring a full assembly line which would allow his team to produce even more toys. However, there was one toy that Ole Kirk refused to produce. The recent horrors of World War II, combined with Ole Kirk's time in the military fighting in World War I, caused him to realize that war was no game. When LEGO began making toys following the Second World War, he would say that war should never be made to seem like child's play, and that LEGO would have a strict no-weapons policy for the next several decades. This is why LEGO doesn't make super realistic guns or certain sets such as historically accurate tanks. This is also why there are so many alternative brick brands that do. In fact, I've got an entire video that goes over LEGO's history of weapons, and I'll link it in the description if you're interested. By 1945, the company had been rebuilt, the Nazis had been defeated, and things were once again looking up for Ole Kirk. However, the company's biggest challenge was yet to come, and the world would never be the same. In 1946, Ole Kirk was visiting a toy fair in Copenhagen when he saw something he'd never seen before, a plastic injection molding machine. In the 1940s, plastic was still a fairly new invention and was rapidly growing in popularity as more traditional materials such as stone, metal, and wood were still in short supply following the war. While the injection molding machine was impressive on its own, what really caught Ole Kirk's eye were the small plastic bricks that the vendor gave him as a sample of what the machine could do. These large interlocking building cubes, as they were officially called, were being developed by a British company called Kittycraft, and had been patented since 1939. Seeing these bricks for the brilliant toy that they were, and spotting room for significant improvement in their design, Ole Kirk became the very first toy maker in Denmark to buy an injection molding machine in 1947. This was no small thing either, and the machine cost more than double the company's profits from the previous year. To make sure to capitalize on this opportunity, over the next 2 years, Ole Kirk and his team went through countless prototypes, trying to improve on the original Kittycraft bricks, until in 1949 they rolled out the automatic binding brick, and the world would never be the same. It's impossible to overstate just how much of a risk this was from a business standpoint at the time, and these early bricks weren't an instant hit. In fact, sales were rather poor throughout the 1950s, but if you haven't noticed, Ole Kirk wasn't one for giving up. In 1950, Ole Kirk Christiansen, the same kid who burned down his father's shop and who skipped the last coat of varnish, was named Junior Managing Director. So remember kids, no matter how much you screw up, it's never too late to find success. Godfred spent the next decade perfecting these plastic bricks. In 1951, LEGO changed the product's name from automatic binding bricks to LEGO Mursten, which is Danish for blocks. And they also began including the LEGO logo onto all of their bricks that they created. In 1954, Godfred visited a toy exhibition in Britain where he met the purchasing manager for one of Copenhagen's largest department stores, Magasin du Nord. During their conversation, the manager commented, quote, "What an industry this is. No system of any kind whatsoever," in reference to the toy industry's complete lack of standardization. These words rang in Godfred's ears, and after returning to Billund, Denmark, he launched an exhaustive audit of each of the company's more than 200 products and discovered that there was, in fact, no system at all to what LEGO was doing. Well, that simply wouldn't do. And in 1955, Godfred and LEGO rolled out Town Plan No. 1, the very first set under the LEGO System banner, which would go on to define the company to this very day. Though these still weren't quite what we'd call modern LEGO, and these bricks aren't entirely compatible with more modern offerings. Godfred and LEGO spent the 1950s perfecting their new design and experimenting with different types of plastic until they stumbled across the perfect formula. LEGO bricks in the 1950s were primarily made out of cellulose acetate. This was before they transitioned to ABS plastic in the 60s. One of the major differences between these early bricks and the version we all know and love today is what LEGO calls clutch power, which is basically the brick's ability to stick to another brick. The early automatic binding bricks were lacking one key design feature that prevented them from truly sticking together. They had no tubes on the bottom. This meant that the bricks were able to slip and slide around, and it wasn't until LEGO developers added their signature tubes underneath that they finally cracked the case. Finally, on July 28, 1958, LEGO patented the modern brick. These earliest bricks were truly revolutionary and showed off LEGO's eternal commitment to quality. Today, these first modern bricks are still perfectly compatible with everything that rolls off LEGO's lines, highlighting just how fundamental the LEGO system has become to the company. And if you want to get your own piece of LEGO history, you can pick up a copy of the patent as a full-sized poster from the SpitBrix poster shop. There's a link on screen and also in the description below. These new bricks were an instant success, and the company was quickly able to grow to the largest it had ever been, with 140 full-time employees. Sadly, 1958 wasn't all good news for LEGO though. Shortly after submitting the patent application that would make the company a global icon, founder Ole Kirk Christiansen passed away from a heart attack at the age of 66. Today, the central square of Billund is named Ole Kirk Plads in his honor and is home to the LEGO House. The 1960s were a time of massive growth for the small Danish toy company. Now that they had perfected the LEGO brick, customers simply couldn't get enough. While the company's home of Denmark had proven to be a lucrative market, the nation's fairly small population meant that there was only so many customers that the company could reach, and so LEGO decided that it was finally time to go global. In 1961, LEGO expanded its production capabilities to North America and contracted with a company called Schwader. This company would later go on to change its name to Samsonite, which is a name familiar to anyone who's ever been in an airport. The company would be allowed to produce their own LEGO bricks at a plant in Denver, Colorado, using molds rented from the company's European factories, ensuring that every brick produced in the US would be compatible with their European counterparts. It was around this time that LEGO also bought the company's first 2 planes to help transport people and products from factory to factory. These first flights were piloted by 2 cousins named Hans Erik Christiansen and Hans Jørgen Christiansen. They were seemingly unrelated to the Christiansen family who had founded LEGO. It's just a common Danish last name. And despite sounding very similar, they're spelled a little bit differently. There was one small issue though. Billund didn't currently have an airport. So what's an enterprising company to do? Well, under Godfred's direction, LEGO built the Billund Airport and opened it in 1964, granting the residents of Billund, Denmark, as well as neighboring cities access to it. By 1985, the small airfield had been expanded and was officially upgraded to an international airport. Today, Billund is Denmark's second busiest airport after Copenhagen. Now, the 1960s were also a period of experimentation for LEGO. Now that the company had settled on a unified design for their classic bricks, the next thought was, well, what if we made them bigger? And in 1964, LEGO and Schwader rolled out the Jumbo Brick, also known as the Kindergarten Brick. These new offerings were much larger than any bricks that LEGO had released before, and as the name implied, they were targeted towards young children for whom the tiny bricks presented a choking hazard. These bricks, though, weren't a huge success, and US production was halted after less than a decade, around 1971. Around the same time as the Jumbo bricks, LEGO rolled out another long-forgotten line, Modulex. These bricks were pretty much the exact opposite of the kindergarten bricks, as they were much smaller than standard LEGO and came in fewer, less vibrant colors. I did a whole deep dive into the fascinating history and story behind Modulex that I'll link in the description, but the short version goes something like this. Much like his father, Ole Kirk Christiansen was a skilled architect and designer, and was in the process of designing his new home. Seeing how LEGO sets at the time were almost entirely miniature buildings, he figured that these would be a great way to create an initial layout and design. Well, he quickly realized that LEGO bricks were, in fact, not a very good representation of actual building supplies. The basic issue is that LEGO bricks are built to an unrealistic 5x5x6 ratio, which makes them incredibly difficult to translate to the real world. This inspired Gottfried to create an entirely new line of smaller bricks with a 1:1:1 scale, which would allow far more accurate and true-to-life designs. However, it was obvious to him that children wouldn't care about such things, and that these bricks would be needed to be treated very differently by the company if they were to succeed. To that end, the company sold them under the name Modulex and marketed them directly to architects and designers as an alternative to traditional design materials. Over the next several decades, Modulex would rise and fall a few times and was eventually spun off into its own separate company. Today, Modulex still exists, though you won't be able to find any of their bricks in stores as they now only create signs for office buildings. Seriously, the story of how these tiny bricks went from a niche LEGO offering to one of the world's largest sign makers is fascinating and kind of odd, so be sure to check out that video after this one. Among all of these wild experiments, there was at least one that proved to be a massive success and would change the way that LEGO designs sets to this day: the wheel. While today LEGO wheels come in all shapes and sizes, these original ones were a little bit less varied. Regardless, they were an instant hit with fans, and the company has never looked back. As a fun fact, today LEGO produces more tires than anyone else in the world. For more context, LEGO makes an astonishing 388 million tires every year, which is more than double that of second place Michelin's 166 million tires. By the end of the 1960s, LEGO had become a global sensation, and fans from around the world were eager to learn more about the company and to see how their favorite toys were being made. In the mid-60s, more than 20,000 visitors a year were making their way to the company's main factory. This was, as you can imagine, not ideal for a large-scale industrial factory full of expensive and dangerous machines. Something needed to be done. Gottfried was always on the lookout for new ways of growing the business, and so with this, Gottfried had an idea of creating a real-life Legoland, where customers and fans could explore all that LEGO had to offer. This would allow the factory to focus on making bricks, while giving visitors a handcrafted experience like no other. To design the very first Legoland, Gottfried reached out to a man named Arnold Vautrup, who was the chief designer at a department store in Copenhagen and the man behind the city's most imaginative sales window. When the park opened on June 7, 1968, the response was immediate, as LEGO fans flooded the park. In that first season of operation, Legoland hosted more than 625,000 guests. That was more than double what the park had planned on, and for a bit of perspective, was more than 10% of Denmark's entire population of just under 5 million people at the time. The first day was so busy that LEGO's marketing director, Helge Torp, was stuck washing dishes alongside two other executives in the park restaurant's kitchen. Since then, Legoland has shown little sign of slowing down, and the entire history of LEGO's theme parks is a fascinating story. If you'd like to see a full deep dive into this topic in the future, be sure to let me know down in the comments. Now, the 1960s would see one other change to LEGO's roster when the company rolled out Duplo in 1969. It seems like the idea of the jumbo bricks had been popular enough, as parents were eager for LEGO bricks that could be played with by toddlers, but the jumbo bricks were simply too large and expensive to buy in bulk. Today, Duplo is an essential part of LEGO's business, and is likely the first experience that young fans will have with LEGO. With the meteoric rise of LEGO in North America, LEGO decided that it simply made sense to create a US subsidiary to help streamline production and distribution across the US and Canada. In 1973, LEGO founded LEGO Systems Incorporated in Connecticut. This first factory was initially simply a packaging and distribution center for Duplo, but it would expand over the years, eventually becoming North America's largest LEGO molding factory by 1980. Also in 1973, Ole Kirk Christiansen stepped down as head of LEGO to become chairman of the board of directors of LEGO System. He would continue to play a pivotal role in shaping the company over the next several years until his son, Ole Kirk Christiansen, became CEO in 1979. That same year, LEGO changed its logo, which is something the company had done repeatedly over the decades, by dropping the word system and creating a much more minimalist, streamlined look, which is almost identical to the version we still see today. By the mid-1970s, LEGO's brand and image were cemented in people's heads, and the world simply couldn't get enough LEGO bricks. While LEGO has always been about creativity and building whatever your heart desires, the sets themselves had all focused almost exclusively on homes and cities. While builders could create a wide array of police stations, train stations, and houses, there was one thing that even the biggest LEGO city was lacking: people. By 1974, LEGO had begun releasing a line of sets called Homemakers, which were built to a completely different scale than most standard sets. These builds featured detailed rooms and houses and were large enough to accommodate small dolls. The only issue was that LEGO didn't make any. That is, until 1974's set simply called Family, which was released to a mixed reception at first. While LEGO fans were genuinely happy to finally get some plastic people, the scale of these figures simply didn't match with the vast majority of LEGO sets, and the figures were seen as fairly niche. In fact, some diehard fans even considered them to not be real LEGO. Well, those complaints were heard loud and clear by LEGO designers, and in 1975, the company released something a bit closer to what fans had been hoping for. Set 370, Police Headquarters, was far from the first police station that LEGO had ever released, but it's remembered today as the first LEGO set to contain something like a modern minifigure. These static figures were almost the same size as modern minifigures, but lacked arms, a face, or moving legs. These were an instant smash hit, and LEGO quickly realized that they had a brand-defining icon on their hands. It just needed a little bit longer in the oven to get to its final state. 1977 saw LEGO take one of its biggest, most ambitious swings when it began rolling out the LEGO Expert Builder line. These sets were meant to be larger, more complicated builds, designed for fans who grew up on LEGO but were now looking for something a little bit more challenging. While these new sets barely resembled LEGO at all, builders loved them, and the line was here to stay. However, the biggest challenge to come to LEGO in the 1970s happened in 1978, when LEGO released set number 600, Police Patrol. With only 16 pieces, this set was just one of a dozen builds released around the time and would easily have been forgotten if not for this: the very first modern minifigure. This little guy came with movable arms and legs, and even a printed face. At the time, there was no way to know just how much of a global icon that yellow face would become. First of all, it's important to point out that the first modern minifigures in 1978 had printed faces, but their torsos weren't, and each one had to have a sticker attached to the front. During the late 1970s, LEGO went all in on minifigures. In 1978, LEGO rolled out the Castle line with the now legendary yellow castle, which came with 14 minifigures. That's a lot compared to sets nowadays, albeit these were simpler and featured stickers on their armor plates and shields. The very next year, LEGO changed the game once again when they launched the Space line, which made heavy use of minifigures across all of its sets. Notice the bright, vibrant colors used across these sets and minifigures. The space theme would prove to be a smash hit among fans and has been a staple of LEGO ever since.
These are the adventures of Legoland Space. Its unending mission: to explore the depths of imagination, to seek out brave new worlds of excitement, to boldly go where no child has gone before.
In 1979, Ole Kirk Christiansen was officially made president and CEO of the LEGO Group. While Ole would oversee significant growth at LEGO over the next 25 years, his tenure would also nearly bankrupt the entire company due to a couple key decisions, but I'm getting ahead of myself. With the rollout of the castle and space themes, as well as the recent invention of the modern minifigure, LEGO had created a winning formula for success, and the 1980s were a decade of steady growth, punctuated by a few major hits. 1980 kicked things off with LEGO establishing its Educational Products Department, which focused on developing new uses for LEGO in early education settings. Education has always been a core principle of LEGO, and this new official department would have almost complete freedom to design and develop new ways to combine learning and play. In 1989, they would officially rebrand as LEGO Dacta, and by 2006, they had changed the name once again to LEGO Education, a name still used to this day. One massive subset of LEGO that I really never talk about on my channel is LEGO Trains. Seriously, you'd be absolutely shocked by just how many diverse trains this company has rolled out since their introduction in 1966. In 1981, the company released the second generation of LEGO Trains available, in both 4.5 volt and 12 volt, and featured a wide range of new accessories such as working lights, remote-controlled points and signals, and decouplers. By 1982, the LEGO Expert Builder line had continued to grow since its release 5 years prior. These sets were significantly different from normal LEGO, while still being largely compatible, and these had been a massive hit. However, the company didn't like that the name Expert Builder might turn off newer customers, and so they rebranded the line as LEGO Technic. That first year saw the release of a few universal sets, as they were known, that came with a few hundred bricks and instructions for a few unique builds. I just have to point out these instructions, by the way, because they are wildly complex by modern standards. Just check out the first page of instructions for building a car from one of these sets. We've really come a long way. 1982 also marked LEGO's 50th anniversary, and the company celebrated by releasing the book 50 Years of Play, which featured hundreds of behind-the-scenes images and stories from the company's first half-century. Today, you can still find copies of these books floating around for about $60, and they make a great addition to any collection. Now, 1984 was perhaps one of the biggest years in LEGO's history, as the company officially launched the LEGO Castle line. While LEGO had been releasing castle-themed sets like the Knight's Joust since 1978, those weren't officially sold under a unified banner. That all changed with the release of sets like the King's Castle, the Blacksmith Shop, and the Siege Tower. While giving castle sets their own branding was cool, the real stars of this era were all of the new accessories that LEGO was producing for their still relatively new minifigures. This period gave us some truly legendary pieces like bows and arrows, horses, saddles, and so much more. By 1987, LEGO had also introduced factions, including the Forestmen, Crusaders, and Black Knights. In 1985, LEGO rolled out some of its earliest electronic sets, which expanded on things that people liked about the LEGO Train sets and also featured builds like the Mobile Police Truck and the Hook and Ladder Truck. These were under the Light and Sound line, and so, as the name implies, these sets included a special light and sound brick to simulate the flashing lights and sirens of these emergency vehicles. Over the next decade, LEGO released about a dozen sets in this line across the town and space themes, but to be honest, the theme never really took off. I did a pair of videos about LEGO's history with light and sound bricks that cover these sets in more detail, so go check them out in the description after this video. Also in 1985, LEGO reached a major milestone of 5,000 employees. This growth was primarily stimulated by the company opening its first Asian production factory in South Korea, and the next year, LEGO opened its first factory in South America in Brazil. Additionally, 1985 saw the very first official LEGO store outside of Billund open in Sydney, Australia. Now, the next year in 1986, Ole Kirk Christiansen stepped down as chairman of the board at LEGO, officially ending a literal lifetime of work shaping the company into the global success it had become. His son and current CEO Kjeld stepped up once again to fill his father's shoes as chairman while still remaining CEO of the company. Once again, he would see the company grow massively for the next decade, but the clock was ticking. The last few years of the 1980s saw three major additions to LEGO that have shaped almost everything the company has done since then. The first was the creation of the now ubiquitous brick separator. While the modern version has undergone a few changes, the basic form and function have stayed the same. Up till this point, the best way to get two bricks unstuck was by using your teeth or breaking a fingernail, but that all changed when builders started finding these little gray wedges in sets. The second major advancement that LEGO rolled out around this time was the release of new designs for minifigure faces. Up until this point, every minifigure head was completely identical. a deliberate design choice to make sure that any head could be used anywhere, since the minimalist design could represent anyone. However, builders were beginning to want a bit of variety, and so in 1989, LEGO released the very first uniquely printed minifigure heads as part of the company's third and most important late 80s edition, LEGO Pirates. You see, after a decade of major successes with LEGO Space and Castle, the company was eager to roll out a third line, and Pirates quickly cemented itself as the third pillar in LEGO's catalog. Over the next several years, these new sets would really step up in complexity and introduce countless new pieces, such as monkeys, sharks, skeletons, and more. As a fun fact, these skeletons were actually designed more than a decade before they were released, as the company didn't feel it was appropriate to sell a dead minifigure to kids. But that was hardly the most controversial part of the Pirates line. This series introduced something else that LEGO fans had never seen before in sets: guns. Alongside their swords, the pirates were also heavily armed with cannons, rifles, and pistols, and this definitely caught a few fans off guard. After all, the company's founder, Ole Kirk, had always been very explicitly against any kind of weapons in LEGO sets. So much so that LEGO didn't even make green LEGO bricks at first, so that kids couldn't build military vehicles. By 1990, LEGO was on top of the world. It was named one of the top 10 toy companies globally, but by the end of the decade, cracks were beginning to show, and the company would very nearly lose everything. Here's an overview of exactly what happened. In the early 90s, LEGO was everywhere, but with all that exposure came a tough question: what's next? The company struggled to find direction after years of massive success. By the mid-90s, LEGO was facing challenges on multiple fronts. Cheaper alternatives were being shipped in from China, the company was more focused on growth than sustainability, and the rise of electronic toys, especially video games, was having a significant impact on their sales. Once a leader in innovation, LEGO now found itself chasing trends instead of setting them. By 1995, it was clear video games were here to stay, and LEGO dipped into gaming with LEGO Fun to Build for the short-lived Sega Pico, which was only ever released in Japan. Shortly after, the company turned things up a notch when in 1997 they launched their very first PC game, the now classic LEGO Island. This game was a pretty major hit, selling over 1 million copies worldwide in its first 2 years, winning a handful of awards, and embedding itself deeply into many happy childhood memories. But it wasn't just digital games that LEGO was trying to capitalize on. LEGO had mostly targeted young boys aged around 6 to 10 years old for its products, but now it wanted to expand. To that end, the company released several new lines targeted at potential new customers. LEGO launched Belleville in 1994 and revived Scala in 1997 in an attempt to appeal to girls, but both lines looked more like traditional dollhouses and failed to resonate with LEGO fans. For older boys, it introduced Throwbots, which leaned more into action and story-based sets. Overall, Throwbots was a moderate success and showed that there was a market for more action-oriented playsets that would pave the way for one of LEGO's biggest successes just a few years later, but Scala and Belleville proved to be pretty unsuccessful when you consider the vast amount of money and resources that ultimately went into making new parts and marketing to a new audience. But it wasn't just about LEGO expanding their customer demographics, because in 1992, a real competitor finally emerged: K'NEX. It wasn't copying LEGO per se, which actually made it more threatening. The toy saw near instant success, and it was doing well enough to make LEGO worried. After a few years of watching from the sidelines, LEGO responded with Znap. And, well, looking back, they probably shouldn't have. Sets like the Jet Car, Tri-Bike, or Ant say it all. To say that these sets were unpopular would be a massive understatement, and the line was very quickly scrapped, just less than a year after being on shelves. Though I do have to admit that just the idea of building a remote-controlled robot ant out of LEGO is pretty cool. The issue was that experimenting with all these new lines of different LEGO products was extremely costly, and financially, LEGO started to take a hit. You see, the company had been focused on expansion and growth at all costs. LEGO had overextended itself. For example, they went from making about 6,000 unique parts to more than 12,000, leading to several manufacturing and storage headaches. They also flooded the shelves with new lines, often inconsistent or overlapping. They also tripled their set count between 1992 and 1998. For example, over that time, LEGO put out about a dozen different sub-themes of space, and none of them lasted more than a year or two. The company also lacked internal auditing. They didn't know which sets were selling the best or where the profits even came from. In 1998, the company reported its first ever annual loss of nearly $40 million. LEGO was in something of a sticky situation by the end of the 20th century, but there was a new hope on the horizon. In 1999, LEGO changed forever with its first licensed theme, Star Wars. This was launched just in time for the release of Episode 1. Although it wouldn't save the company overnight, the impact of Star Wars on the success of LEGO in the 21st century cannot be understated. And despite the internal struggles and financial issues that LEGO was having, in the year of 2000, LEGO was named the Toy of the Century, beating out icons such as Barbie and the teddy bear, and even the classic Slinky. While this award was a major win for the company, it sadly wasn't enough to spare them from what was about to come. LEGO Star Wars was an instant smash with fans hungry for more. These early sets introduced countless firsts like unique heads, skin tones, short legs, and more. Harry Potter soon followed, with early sets like the Sorting Hat, the Final Challenge, the Chamber of the Winged Keys, and the first version of Hogwarts Castle. These sets flew off store shelves at a record rate, and LEGO realized how much money they could make with licensed IP. Since these early hits, the company has gone all in on licensed themes and made sets to tie in with nearly 40 different properties, from Marvel to The Office, and these licensed sets typically make up about half of LEGO's offerings every year. 2001 also saw the launch of Bionicle, a non-licensed property, but a very successful one. These sets more closely resemble the LEGO Technic than the company's more traditional offerings, but this is no surprise since the last style and setting of the series was heavily influenced by Christian Faber, who also designed Throwbots. However, what really set this theme apart was its story and setting. Bionicle figures were big, durable, affordable, and wildly successful. The amount of detailed history and lore of LEGO Bionicle absolutely deserves its own video, so let me know if that's something you'd like to see in the future. But the main point here is that LEGO was riding high on Star Wars and Bionicle, thinking that the times of financial struggles were over. But you see, a decade of mismanagement was about to come back and bite them hard. Remember, the late 90s were full of flops like Scala and Znap, but none compared to Galidor. Launched in 2002 alongside a live-action TV show and a McDonald's Happy Meal tie-in, Galidor tried to appeal to older kids with action figures and sci-fi storytelling. It backfired spectacularly. The show was cancelled within months, and the sets, mostly clunky action figures with swappable limbs, barely resembled LEGO at all. Fans rejected them instantly. Galidor currently holds 2 LEGO records: the heaviest single LEGO element ever made, which is the 727-gram TDN module, as well as the lowest rated set on Brickset, Nick, the Happy Meal toy, with a score of just 1.8 out of 5 stars. But LEGO's problems went far beyond one bad theme. Managing such a large catalog of products was really taking its toll. By 2004, the company posted a record loss of $350 million in a single year. Mads Nipper, LEGO's VP of Marketing, later summed it up. He said, "LEGO was almost bankrupt. We continued to invest as if the company was still growing strongly. We failed to realize that we were on a slippery path. Children were getting less and less time to play. Some of the Western markets had fewer and fewer children, so play trends changed, and we failed to change. We were not making toys that were sufficiently interesting to children. We failed to innovate enough, and we had nowhere cut deep enough to right-size the company." In 2004, Ole Kirk Christiansen stepped down as CEO, handing the reins to Jürgen Vin Knudstorp, the first non-family CEO. The same year, LEGO sold all 4 Legoland parks and brought 80% of manufacturing back in-house. These were among a series of cuts that LEGO did to step back and regain its footing. Under new management, LEGO took things in a different direction and made some painful, though necessary, cuts to its operating costs. Most notably, the company reduced its workforce from 9,100 employees down to only 4,200. Additionally, they moved a bulk of their production to Mexico and headquartered distribution in the Czech Republic, among several other moves aimed at streamlining the company's operations and supply chain. The next few years were pretty slow for LEGO, as they focused on rebuilding the company from the ground up, but it wasn't without some notable events. For example, LEGO released the first batch of full-length CGI LEGO movies under the Bionicle line. These were small direct-to-DVD films, but they showed that LEGO was still interested in creating tie-ins for their various series. In 2005, LEGO officially rebranded its classic town line to LEGO City, unifying all of its various sub-themes under a single banner. 2005 also saw one of the biggest game changers within the company's entire history when they released LEGO Star Wars, the video game. While this wasn't the company's first video game, it was the first to be released on home consoles like the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and even the Game Boy Advance, as well as Mac and PC. Overall, the game received mediocre reviews, with Computer Game Magazine saying it's too easy and over too soon, but for $30, it's nearly a complete childhood on CD. Despite this, the game sold nearly 7 million copies, spawned a massive line of sequels, and set the overall template that nearly every LEGO video game would follow for the next 20 years. 2006 would give us the introduction of LEGO Batman, as well as LEGO Mindstorms NXT, while 2007 would see the return of LEGO Castle. And in 2008, LEGO introduced Indiana Jones and LEGO Architecture. The rest of the decade would also give us LEGO Agents, Power Miners, and the return of LEGO Pirates. Lastly, 2010 saw the release of the first wave of collectible minifigures, which would be a real money printer for LEGO. By 2010, global sales were up more than 20%, and LEGO saw profits of more than $100 million in 2009, and was, quote, delivering twice the return on sales of any competitor. Things were looking up, and the company seemed to be back on track. They even released the first LEGO movie on DVD, titled The Adventures of Clutch Powers. However, the company's biggest success was just around the corner. While much of the early 2000s was dominated by LEGO's licensed themes, LEGO wasn't about to abandon their own original lines. But it had been more than 20 years since anything had captured the success of LEGO Pirates. Well, in 2011, that all changed, when LEGO finally gave fans what they'd been asking for: ninjas. Ninjago was released in 2011, and like Star Wars, immediately proved itself to be a massive hit. As of today, Ninjago is one of LEGO's longest-running original themes, and has easily earned its spot alongside other greats like Space, City, and Castle. In addition to the successful rollout of the Spinjitzu Spinner game, the success of Ninjago was in part due to the line's associated TV show, which, unlike Galidor, was, well, actually good. The show has put out over 15 seasons, several direct-to-DVD releases, and even a major motion picture with full theatrical release. Released in 2017, the LEGO Ninjago movie was a moderate success at the box office, earning $123 million against a $70 million budget, and despite some mediocre reviews from critics, this was a huge win for Ninjago fans. Regardless, the line of sets has continued to succeed and impress fans of all ages, with no sign of slowing down anytime soon. It's officially an evergreen theme for LEGO. But as you may know, the LEGO Ninjago movie actually came after a couple other blockbuster smash hits, such as the LEGO Movie in 2014. This first film with Warner Bros. Combined cutting-edge animation and brilliant writing with some serious star power like Chris Pratt and Will Ferrell. The movie was a truly massive hit, earning a whopping $470 million on a rather small budget of only $65 million. This led to a somewhat less well-received sequel, as well as the wildly successful LEGO Batman movie in 2017. At this point, the company had successfully recovered from near total collapse in just a little over 10 years, and in 2015, LEGO had actually become the world's largest toy company in terms of annual revenue. After reaching this momentous company milestone and further solidifying its place as the largest toy company in the world, CEO Jürgen Van Knutstorp stepped down in the beginning of 2017. He was replaced by a man named Bali Pata, a decision which the company would quickly regret. In the first half of 2017, LEGO experienced its first drop in revenue in 13 years, after having grown every single year under Knutstorp's time as CEO. Now, to be clear, it's not really fair to lay all the blame for this drop at Pata's feet, as he was LEGO's chief operations officer under Knutstorp and had been with the company since 2002. Also, business decisions don't typically show their effects right away and can take years to become a problem. While the details of the company's losses in 2017 are complicated and the causes are many, the basic version is that LEGO had spent the last few years making too many bricks, and now found itself with a massive surplus of inventory, which led to distribution and storage hurdles, as well as handling costs that the company couldn't immediately overcome. Regardless of who exactly is to blame, Bali Pata resigned in October 2017 after only 10 months as CEO of LEGO. He was replaced by Niels B. Christiansen, who, despite his name, is completely unrelated to LEGO's founder Ole Kirk Christiansen or any of the LEGO founding family. It's just a common last name in Denmark. In fact, it's actually the 16th most common surname as of 2024. And interestingly enough, an alternative spelling of the name is actually the 6th most populous. There are a lot of Christiansens in Denmark. Under the leadership of Niels B. Christiansen, the new CEO, the company spent the next several years growing larger and even more successful. However, the company's biggest boost was about to come from the most unexpected source. In the spring of 2020, the world shut down due to the COVID-19 pandemic. While this was a major problem for many companies, LEGO was uniquely positioned to turn a global crisis into a massive business opportunity. During the pandemic, an unprecedented number of people found themselves locked inside with nowhere to go and very little to do. It seems that this newfound spare time and boredom caused many to revisit some of their old childhood toys, and millions of adults around the world rediscovered their love for LEGO. Over the preceding few years, LEGO's revenue had been pretty stable, bringing in about $5 billion per year. But in 2020, well, the company raked in $6.5 billion, a 30% year-over-year increase. While this came as a very pleasant surprise to LEGO, the biggest shock was just who was buying these sets. For most of its history, LEGO had been a children's toy first and foremost, and the company had previously claimed that it didn't even market to customers over the age of 12. While LEGO had been slowly experimenting with larger sets more tailored to older builders, the pandemic highlighted just how much of a demand there was from adults, and LEGO began branding these 18+ sets as LEGO icons, packed in dark boxes to give the sets a more professional look to appeal to adults. 2020 also gave us a few new themes, including Super Mario and Monkey Kid. But the next year saw the rise of yet another theme. In 2021, thanks to the success of the bonsai tree, LEGO discovered that people absolutely love building flowers and plants. This resulted in the creation of the LEGO Botanical Collection theme, featuring various brick-built plants, which quickly became one of the company's fastest-growing themes in terms of popularity. Moving on, 2022 marked LEGO's 90th anniversary, and the company celebrated with World Playday, and a line of reimaginings of classic sets, including updated versions of the Galaxy Explorer and Lion Knight's Castle. In 2023, LEGO rolled out Dreams, and 2024 gave us a whole new slew of new themes, including Animal Crossing, The Legend of Zelda, Fortnite, and more. That's a lot of video game lines in just a few years, and it doesn't seem like LEGO is slowing down on that front. In 2025, LEGO announced that it had finally managed to acquire a license that fans had been begging for years: Pokemon. While it's impossible to predict what LEGO's got cooking for the next few years, it's safe to assume that the company isn't going anywhere anytime soon. In the not too distant future, LEGO will celebrate a full century of making and selling toys, and I, for one, come up with to celebrate that incredible milestone. What do you think they'll do? Thank you very much for watching this documentary on the entire history of LEGO. If you want to learn more about LEGO's history, make sure to check out this video and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an upload.